So as you can see, we've now moved from Silo into Maya. We've brought in our two main versions of the model. We have our low resolution model here, which we've gone through and we've optimized, and I've placed these into layers. And we also have the high resolution version, and this is just press 3 and it smooth meshes it, and all that's doing is it's Maya's version of subdivision surfaces, so it's just giving it the impression of being smooth. It's not actually adding any more geometry into the model. So if we go back to our lower resolution version, we'll just have a quick look at some of the optimization I've done so far. I just press Control Space just to bring that up to full screen so we can have a closer look. So you can see we have the shirt, we have his poncho, and these are all separate elements at the moment. They've all been optimized down. You can see here we've got less geometry in the arm. We've kept these in these polygons here over the knuckles, which make it better for when it's bending. And if I say we select the shirt and I just isolate that model, you can see how I've removed everything underneath, because this is where the poncho begins here. So there's no point having that geometry under there, because you will never see it, and when it comes to rigging the model, you'll end up with the poncho going in and out of the chest polygons here. They'll pop through and it'll just look a complete mess. Now if the poncho, for example, was to flap around, this top layer was separate to the bottom and they were both to flap around separately, then you would keep the bottom of the the underneath area of this shirt in there, because then you'd see it. So you just have to judge what you're going to see, what you're not going to see. If you don't see it or you don't need it, get rid of it. And again with the poncho, this has been welded together here with all the geometry between them removed, and the same has happened with everything else. The lower legs, his bandana, his head. So it's really stripped down to the bare bones. But now we need to go in and refine it a bit more. And by refining, I mean we need to make sure that there's enough geometry in there to get rid of any extremely angular areas, or for when we bake out the normal map looks its best. So let's go back to the shirt and use this as an example. Now the bottom here is quite angular, but what we can do is just bake out a normal map onto this and just see how it's going to look. So first of all, I'm going to assign a blin, and that's going to make it shiny, and that will help to show up the normal map. Just close that down. I'm going to go to Lighting, Shading, Transfer Maps, and that brings up this window. Now you're going to use this a lot later on in the tutorial, mainly to be able to bake out your normal maps, but because our main high resolution model is coloured, we can also bake out the diffuse map. So you'll need to remember that later when you've UV'd your model and you come to bake out your final maps. So for this, we're just going to select the shirt, and that's going to be our target mesh that we're baking onto. If I open up the outliner, like so, you can see I've put them into groups and named them appropriately. So shirt low is our target mesh, so we need to find our shirt high, which is a high resolution model. Add that into there, we can close that down. Now we can assign it to the assigned shader, so it will just assign it to this blend. We will up the resolution, maybe 1.24. We can just set that to preview, leave everything else as it is. Now we need to tell it what maps to bake, so for now we're just going to bake out a normal map. But like I say, later on, we've done the UV, and we come back to doing your normal map, also do the diffuse map, and just give you that colour information as well. So we're just going to keep it as the default file name, because this is just a temporary map just for us to test. So that is fine. So I'm just going to minimize that for a second. this is what we're baking onto. Let's just have a quick look at the shirt we're baking from. Now the problem is, Maya will treat this, even though we've applied a smooth mesh, Maya will still treat it like a low resolution model. So what we need to do is just go in for a quick mesh smooth. Now that's baking that smooth into the model. If you don't do that, then it will bake out the low resolution version of the normal map and it won't look right. Go back to our low mesh and what we'll do is I will isolate that so we can see what we end up with. Now this currently has no UVs on it, because it's come straight from Silo with no UV on. We're not going to spend and waste time applying proper UVs just yet, because we may edit the bottom of this model. Instead, I'm just going to go to Create UVs, Automatic Mapping, and that's all we need for now. So now let's press Bake. Maya work its magic. It is done. I'm sure high quality rendering is on, and also hardware texturing as well. And there you can see we've got our normal map applied. You need to go through each object and do this for every one. Just minimize this while we have a look. So looking at this, so we've got a problem there where I've accidentally left the part of the hand model in there, so that needs stripping. So we rotate around this model, just check, particularly this area here, and it does look too angular to benefit from that normal map. So now we've tested it, we can just go in and we can build in some more geometry in here. So just using the split polygon tool, just going to go in, add in a few quick splits. Obviously you can take a bit more time over this, and you'll need to do it on both sides of the model. Make sure you don't edit this bit in here where you've already lined up and welded it with the lights. Okay, just going through, adding in a bit of geometry just to allow us to set in this edge. Again, we'll soften those normals, like so, and then we can go in, we'll just select these edges here, move them up slightly just to round that off a bit better. Make sure we round it this way too. Now it's only a subtle change, but it's going to make all the difference. If we bring back our transfer maps, because we've already got an assigned shader, we can just press Bake again, go through it again, recalculate those lines. And as you can see, it's rounded that off, and that looks much better than it did before. Now if you want to make sure that that edge is spot on with the high resolution model, what we can do is bring back both, like so, just isolate those two, set this layer to a template. As you can see there, we're slightly off, it's just outside the model a bit. But this is what I mean, you can take a bit more care over it. This is just a basic demonstration to just show you what you need to be doing. In, back down, just so it's closer to the geometry. Something like that, that'll do. Hide that again. So and then we can bake out another map. Again, just overwriting that temporary texture. So from a distance, which is what we will be looking at in game, that looks a lot smoother and a lot rounder. Now the other side we didn't do, but we should have done, but it gives us a chance to highlight the differences. As you can see, this looks quite angular here. Go around to the other side, it's nice and smooth. So this is the stage that we're at now. Just go through every model, quickly apply automatic mapping, bake out a basic normal map and just look around the mesh and just see where you can benefit from a few extra polygons. And while you're at it, why not look, while you're inspecting each model, look see if there's any more that you can chop out. And obviously check for any errors like here where I've accidentally left those hand polygons on there, which I'm sure if we look at the hand, yep, been a bit too excited with my extracting and I've chopped it off by the back of there. But doing this has just allowed us to find that error, and now we can fix it. And we get a nice preview of what the normal maps are going to look like when they're applied to the mesh. So that's that stage to go through now. I'll leave you with that to go through the rest of the model, just refine it, optimize it further, just get it down to the bare bones. What I would suggest is to leave the hair model. Now I've tried a few approaches to the hair. I tried baking out normal maps, creating one solid seamless mesh from the hair, but they all came with problems when it came to actually baking the normal map. So what I would do is just ignore the hair for now. We've got our low resolution model which we're going to work from, and we'll talk more about that in the next video where we start to look at applying our final set of UVs. So we're pretty much done with the main game model now. You've optimized it, stripped it down, checked it against the normal map and just refined it, and now you're at a stage where we want to think about applying its final set of UVs. So you can see, as you can see here, I've already begun deleting elements which I'm thinking we could benefit from using a mirrored set of UVs. So these, for example, will use the same texture space, the model will be flipped. Because it's a boot, we can probably get away with that being mirrored. And anything else, as you go through, you'll notice I've removed the studs off here and just left one, because they're all the same, so we can get away with just having one on the texture page, taking up one lot of space. We don't need the rest. And obviously we've got his hair, which we haven't done much with yet, and everything else is pretty much ready to go. So the first thing we need to do is pick an element we're going to start with. We'll UV that, and then we use a similar process for everything else. So let's pick a nice easy object to start off with, and that'll be his head. Let's just isolate that. So we're just looking at the model. Now the top could probably do with a bit more optimizing because it's hidden underneath his hair, but again we can come back to that later. So what we need to do first is apply a texture so we can see just how the UVs are looking at the moment. So what I have is a basic checker texture which I use when I'm doing all my UV mapping, and as you can see, the UVs just don't look right at all. If you look here, you can just make out the texture, but everywhere else it's stretched. So we need to apply a base set of UVs, and from that we can start to tweak and edit it. So what I'm going to do first is select the model, create UVs, planar map, and all I'm going to do is project it from the front to the back, because we're going to have a seam at the back here because that's hidden under his hair, and you see the front of his face more than you do his back. So if there's a little seam at the back of his head, you may not see it that much, so that's probably a sensible place to put it. So project it down the Z-axis, which will project from the front. Click apply, and that gives us this basic set of UVs here. The problem is it's stretched at the side. If I open up the UV editor, turn off the image, as you can see we've projected from the front, but we've got overlapping UVs at the back, so these are flipped and they're stretched at the side. So what I'm going to do is where we wanted our seam, double click to select that edge loop, polygons, cut UV edges. Then I'm going to zoom out and select all those UVs, and then right click on unfold selected UVs like so. Just running out of space here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unfold it, but just horizontally. We don't want to worry about vertically just yet. Click apply, and that's unfolded those back UVs out and given us quite a nice UV layout. And just to make sure, we'll do a vertical one as well, and that's just leveled it out a bit more as well. As you can see, that's a much nicer set of UVs. Now what we could do is select these edges here and just align those so they're straight, just to tidy things up. And then we'll select all the middle ones, keep these edges deselected because we don't want those to be edited. Open this again and do the same again, horizontal and vertical. You'll notice I haven't used none yet, and that's left for the more complicated shapes. This was quite a simple shape, just to nail down the sort of process that I go through when I'm UVing in Maya. Now a lot of people don't seem to like the UV tools in Maya, but I've been using them for a while now, and it's probably more that I'm used to using them, but I think they're quite easy to use and you can get pretty good results. Now obviously, with any game texture page, this needs to fit inside a 1 unit square. So we'll scale that down and we'll just leave it outside that square for now. Because once you've UV'd each element separately, we then need to arrange them so they all fit in this square here. So if I unisolate that, so that's the first section done, and that was quite easy. For the next section, if you notice, these are quite simple shapes, so they're not very complicated to UV. The same with the belt. So it's just a case of going through each object, just as I did with the head, create an initial projection. In fact, let's just show you with the hand here. What I'll do is I'll separate those because we don't need to do both at the same time. Mesh, separate. Now the texture's gone a bit funny there, but we'll just reapply it. It was just the basic Lambert. Isolate that. Now we're going to treat this like two objects. We've effectively got the hand and the arm, and we're going to UV those separately. So I'm going to extract them to separate them. Apply our checker map, like so, to the arm and to the hand. Now the UVs on here don't look too bad because that's the automatic mapping which we applied previously. So what I'm going to do is select them both, planar map, and this time straight down from above. Project. Now that's fine from above, but again we've got the UVs wrong on the side and underneath. If we look at the arm first, we ideally want the seam under the arm because that will be seen less. So dictate where we want our seam to be, polygons, cut UV edges, then we'll select those and again use our unfold tools, and this time we want to unfold them vertically, not horizontally. Apply, and that's unfolded that way, and then we'll do a horizontal one just to smooth those out, and that's done. And that's the arm UVs pretty much done. Now we've got the squares here are smaller than the squares here, so you probably need to go in and just edit those UVs a bit just to even out those squares, and then we can just go on and do the same with the hand. Now this is again projected from the top, but we can't just unfold this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the top from the bottom. So I'm quickly just going to go around like this, just select all the polygons like so. So we're just going to separate the top of the hand from the bottom of the hand. Which there we can collapse. And that's what's good about this stage, we haven't applied any textures yet. So if you do see an area like this, missed the area, we can come back and we can collapse that edge, because we know we don't need that edge. Nothing's set in stone. Sure I've not selected anything on top by accident. Yes, I have. So that's the bottom of the hand selected. And we've tried to keep it even. Now, extract that. Go back to our UV texture editor. Texturing. Now, because the UVs are mirrored under here, what we need to do first is to flick those UVs. These are separated. We can then combine those again. Hides them. Just merge those edges and just soften those normals. Just isolate those again. So now we're on the hand, but we've got the stretching here and here. So we just need to relax those a bit. And we may as well weld these edges here. So what I'm going to do is move this down so that it's just touching. Select this edge here. So use the edges, and that has connected this outer edge here. And then we can select the UVs. This time we'll use none. Relax all UVs inside the hand. Now we do have a bit of stretching here. It's not going to be perfect, but now we can go in, and here we have an area that's overlapping. We can go in and just tweak these border UVs just to fix these stretching areas here, and just to give it a much better layout. Here where we pull it out a bit, just so we've got a bit more of an area, and we can bake our maps and paint our texture. So you get the idea with that. Just then about going around and refining. Now we've got the hand and the arm. And again, combine these. Just isolate them again. Which these close. Just soften those normals. Like that. And now we can bring these and make these into a single model again. So the top of the hand is here. You see the most. Then select it. There we go. You know that edge is there. Select these. Polygons. Move them so. And that's now welded the hand onto there. Now it looks a bit funny because it's offset, like so. And this is a risk that you may want to take, or you may want to play the same. At the moment, the seam for the arm is down here and we've got this section here. It's quite untidy. So what you may want to do is cut this edge here. Let's see if I can just select that edge there. So let's say we want to tidy that up and make it nice and neat. Cut UV edges, and then again we will select these polygons, move them so, and then we just want to tidy up this here with a bitumen and fold. The borders first, vertical, horizontal. If you want it to try and we can attempt to not do it without any restrictions, and that's just unfolded it a little bit better there. Now as you can see, that's a much nicer UV layout, but we've moved our seam to the front of the arm. Now again, this is entirely up to you. If you're confident that your textures are going to be done in such a way that you won't see a seam, then this is fine. This UV layout is much nicer to work with when you're painting textures. If you're using an application like 3D Coat, you could always go in, if you do notice this seam, you can always go in later with 3D Coat and paint the seam out, where you're physically painting directly onto the model. So that's another option there. So I've quickly UV'd a couple of areas. You could quite easily go through the rest of the model and UV each separate element, and even apply basic UV mapping to the hair. And what you can do is UV map one section, and so long as the others have got the same topology, the same amount of vertices, you can use the Mesh Transfer Attributes tool. And what this will do, if you set it to topology, you select one with the UVs on, select where you want to transfer it to, and that will copy the UVs across for you. So you only need to UV one set, and you can copy it to the rest. And that's quite a neat quick trick. What I will do, just pop that back up. So what I have, I'll just hide that. Here's a model that I UV'd earlier, true Blue Peter style. So what you've done is you've UV'd each section separately, and then you need to scale each shell so that the grids are roughly the same size. Now you can see some areas on here are bigger than others, and where the bandana is, for example, you can't really get away with that because of the shape of the model. The head, the grid is bigger because the skin here is going to be quite a basic texture. The eyes will be added on later, probably in a polygon which is over the top and an alpha channel. So there's no point in us having lots of detail in the actual skin. If I open up the UV editor again, you can have a quick look at this UV layout. So if I select the model, so this is what we have. We've got his bandana here, his head here, the ponchos here and here, and just general areas all laid out, both hands, because obviously one hand has the straps on, the other hand doesn't, so we couldn't just mirror those. And obviously we have the hair. Again, one section was UV'd, and then those UV'd using the transfer map tools copied across to the other sections. Now what we have here, you can see that is mirrored, and that I suspect is because if I open up the options, render stats, it's not double-sided, but we probably need to flip those, otherwise the UVs may, the normal map, the texture may look a bit odd, but that's something we can look at later on. So that's the model UV'd. What you need to do now is, as we did before, project normal maps for each section, and while you're doing that, also project a diffuse map. And that will give you a base normal map to work from and a base diffuse map. And we'll look at these in the next video, where we're also going to look at taking it a bit further and baking out some basic lighting. And then what we'll have there are the foundations which will start us off on our final texture page. So in the previous video we applied our UV mapping, and from there you should have extracted your normal map data and your diffuse map data. Now this is just the colour channel and the normal map channel. If I switch to Photoshop, you should have ended up with something like this. This is just the base diffuse channel, just taking the colour information that we added to our high resolution model and baking it out for us. And this just gives us exact colours for areas like the straps and even the studs on the boots. What you will have also baked out is a normal map, something similar to this. Now all I've done with these two sets of images is just overlay them, cut out the bits that we didn't need, and then flatten them down just to give us two maps rather than a series of different ones for each different element. And with these colours to hand and this normal map, what we've essentially got, if I go back to Maya, what we've essentially got is the foundations of the textures. Now this is still our low resolution model, remember, but by adding in that normal map data, it's given us lovely surface detail. Still, we haven't done anything with the hair yet. That is just going to be textured separately. We've UV'd it, we've thought about texture space, and to have a different texture for each strand of hair would just take up lots of texture space. So we need to think ahead and think, well, maybe every other strand could have a different texture. So we have two hair textures and we just put them onto each one randomly. So the hair, I'm not really going to go into much more detail with the hair. It's just going to be as it is, and then we'll just add a texture and create a normal map just to give it a bit of detail. So as I said, we've now got our foundations for our character. The eyes, I'm just going to duplicate the polygons here, and then we'll add another texture on top of the head there, which we can then paint the eyes on as a different alpha channel. Now the eyes are very simple, cartoony style eyes, and in the game they're just going to swap the textures to give the expressions, much like in a cartoon. So we don't need to worry about blend shapes or morph targets or etc. It's just going to be a simple texture swap. There is one more map we can bake out before we turn all our attention to the texturing, and that is an occlusion map. And what that will do is it will give us the lighting information for this model. So for example, underneath his hair, underneath his arms, under the armour he's got here, and his belt and everything else. And then we can overlay that onto our texture, and that'll just give us a lot more depth. If I turn off lighting, this is our current diffuse texture. It's very flat, very boring, there's no depth or anything to it, so we need to add to that, and that's what we're going to do now. So the first thing we need to do, if I just switch into this other model which I've made, is just quickly go around and harden the edges of the belt and all these other bits. Now these edges aren't hard in the game model because we use a normal map to give those nice beveled edges. But when we're creating the light map, these will still be soft, but because we want these to have a harder edge and a harder edge feel to them, we're going to harden these edges now, and that is so when we bake the lighting we'll get that detail in. What you also need to do, if I open up my UV texture editor, this is the current UV map which you've seen before, but what I like to do is take everything that's mirrored and move it across -1. That just moves it out of the way, and if you by accident don't click to ignore mirrored faces or something like that, these elements just won't have any lighting information applied to them because they'll just take the elements from here. I hope you understand that. So let's now generate a light map for this guy. You'll see I've added a floor plane in. This is just a basic polygon, and what that will do is it will mean when the photons are cast from the sky down, they will have something to bounce up off, so we'll know that this area underneath him needs to be darker. Now to create his occlusion map, we are going to go to, now it's moved in Maya 2013 into the colour, and it's in here, batch bake. Before it used to be in lighting and shading. So we're going to use colour, batch bake. Now you need to have the mental ray plugin enabled for this to work. Now you can see here where I've been playing around with it before, so I will reset those settings. So you select the model you want to bake the lighting on. We'll turn on use bake step override, and we are going to bake the occlusion. Now first of all, just set occlusion raised to 10, resolution 512 by 512, give it a name, Ninja Occlusion Baked perhaps. We'll change that to TGA. Now we're only giving it a low resolution because this is a test. I would always do a test because there's always some part of the model which doesn't work properly, the UVs are overlapping, or the light, or there's geometry intersecting, so it's always good to do a test run. So occlusion raise is only 10, so it's only going to do a very basic map. So if I click convert, what I'll do is I'll pause the video first. It may take a couple of minutes, it may be quite quick, so I don't know, so I'll just pause the video and click convert. So that's done. As you can see, it's very pixely, but it's a low resolution map and it's only occlusion raise of 10, so it's very basic. Now if we turn the lighting off here, use no lights, you can see it a little bit better. Just minimize that. So what we've got here is the basic lighting information as if the light was cast from above. Ooh. Under here we've got the nice dark areas where the hair's casting shadow. Ignore that seam there because that will go once we do the higher resolution map, and we can always paint that out if we want to later. Got dark areas under here, behind the belt, and it's all looking pretty much as we want it. There's no black areas where UVs are overlapping or flipped. So when we're happy with that, we go back to our options, set it to the size of the texture page which we're using, which we've baked out at. And I don't think I've mentioned this before, but when you're doing any sort of texturing for games, always work higher than your target resolution. So for example, if it's a 1K map, 1024 by 1024, do all your texturing at 2K, 2048 by 2048. Now what I've chosen to do is do this at 3000, and that just gives me a bit more flexibility. And I know this is going to be rendered out for use in the magazine, so I want that extra bit of resolution just to add a bit more detail into the model. So we're happy with the occlusion map, how it's looking. So now we can go in, set our resolution, up our occlusion raise. The higher the number here, the more accurate and the smoother the occlusion map will be. So maybe 150. Now this will take a while to do. So set this going just as you're about to go for lunch or something like that, and when you come back it should be done. So what I'll do is I will click convert. I'll pause it, click convert, and then we will look at the results. So that one's done. Close that down. As you can see, that's a lot smoother. We don't have our seams anymore. It isn't perfect. We've got these artifacts here because it is a low polygon model that it's baking the lighting information onto. And you'll notice areas like these studs don't look exactly right because they're using the lighting from this stud here, which is the only one with the UVs we're affecting. But we're not too concerned about that because these will be shiny, they'll be bright, so we can get away with just using one set of UVs. So that's the colour map, and that's been baked out. So what do we do with it now? Let's switch back to Photoshop. Go back to our diffuse. So what I've also done is output a UV layout, and here is our occlusion map. As you can see, slightly faceted, but what we can do is we can clean that up just by using a blur. Now what I'll do is I'll just save this just to make sure. I'm going to go into my UV layout, or you could use your base colour map because this is just for a selection. We may actually use the base colour map. Turn off anti-aliasing, tolerance 1, like so. Turn off contiguous, and that will just select all the empty space there. Go back to our occlusion map, and and we'll just expand it by maybe 2 pixels. And then we're going to delete everything around it. As you can see, if I hide these layers, that's emptied everything. And now I'm going to go to Filter, Flaming Pair, and use one of these. Now these flaming pair filters are freely available online, and they're great for filling empty spaces of textures, just so you can avoid texture bleeding when the textures are reduced later on. So we'll just do A, and as you can see, give it a second, and there it's blended the edge pixels out for us. But that hasn't got rid of the faceted look. What we're going to do now to get rid of that, Filter, Blur, Surface Blur. If we move to a section, turn off preview. If you look down here, I just select there and just zoom out. So that is just blurring sort of the inner pixels in a way. But we don't want it to do it too much that it's going to affect those edge pixels and affect those seams. So what you may need to do is play around with these colours slightly and just play around with these values, slightly, until you get a look that's okay. We'll leave it at that for now, let it apply. Just wait a second. Now that's softened those faceted edges, but now we need to apply this to our base colour. What I'm going to do first is use an overlay. Turn those layers on. Now sometimes an overlay will work, sometimes it won't. So a soft light is sometimes better, and that actually does look better if I zoom out. So as you can see, that has just added that lighting information into the texture, and already it's starting to enhance it. We're just going to create another copy of that, and then we'll use a multiply, and this is just going to darken those shaded, shadowy areas just a little bit more. Now while we're playing with these occlusion maps, you may be thinking, oh well, maybe I want the darker areas on the skin to be a slightly different colour. If I just turn this one off for now, what you can do is select those skin colours on your base map, and then we can edit the colours in the occlusion map. So image, adjustment, say hue saturation, just move this down here, set it to colorize, and if you see there, just turning it on and off has tinted the highlighted areas yellow, and then we can adjust the colours until we get the shadows a more natural shade of, well, perhaps more a bluey tint to them. Maybe darken it down. We can also brighten it up, saturate it a bit more. And you see that yellow? I'm quite liking that yellow there. So, also we can do the same on the darker area. Image, adjust, hue saturation. We'll colorize that. Turn up the saturation. Now that's yellow there, so we can change this. Again, just trying to get those darker colours a bit darker. But you get the idea with that. Once you've got your occlusion map, you can then change the colours of the occlusion map to get the look and the feel that you're after in those shaded areas. So if I just save this out, and then we'll jump back into Maya, and we will have a look at what the textures, how the texture's looking so far. So if I go back to my there we go. Bring back our colour, and I'll just quickly reload the texture. And there we go. You see, remember, this isn't lit by anything but the occlusion map, and that has added a lot more depth to the texture, and giving us an even better starting point for our character. Now, as I mentioned, there is a bit of a seam there, but we can take that into 3D Coat, an application which we'll use later on for adding more normal map detail into the texture, and we can paint these areas out, or you could do it in Photoshop and just get those seams seamless. So I think we'll leave this video there. What we've done is we've just baked out some basic lighting information, applied it to our model in a few different ways, and it's just helped to enhance our basic diffuse map. So from here, like I say, we can start to enhance this texture map even more and enhance the normal map, adding in more details. But we just need to remember this is a cartoon character, so it doesn't need to be super realistic. We're just looking for him to be fun. Now let's switch to Photoshop, and here you can see we have our texture map here. And what I've done, and this PSD will be supplied with the files that come with this tutorial. We have our base colours, which are these, which we baked out originally, and they're on a separate layer separated from the background. We also have a detail group, and I'll talk about that shortly. These as well, these are just for generating normal maps and specular maps. And here we have our lighting. Now at the moment we have two versions of the occlusion map. One which is set to an overlay. If I turn these off, like so, and that's just at 50%. If we set that up to 100%, you can see it's quite blown out and a bit too much, so we're just having that at about 50%. And then I've added another copy of the occlusion map over the top, and this time with a multiply blending mode, and again just adjusting the opacity to get the shadows and the lighting contrast that I want. Now these two here I've just stripped out from the normal map, so I've taken the blue channel here. If I add that, and all that is doing is taking this depth information and overlaying it on top, again just to give us more depth. Turn that back to multiply, and the same with the green channel. You see when I add this on top, it's just adding in this extra layer of detail where the creases are, and on the fingers. Again, just adjust another layer of detail there, and that's just taking the green channel from the normal map and again using an overlay, and you can adjust the opacity again there. So if I save that out and we switch back to Maya again, we'll just see what adding those extra couple of maps, if I reload in the texture, has just done. So you see there, as it's popped in, it's just enhanced the creases and just added another layer of depth. Now you will need to go in and touch up the maps slightly, because some areas of the normal maps won't work depending on how you have your UV layout, UVs laid out. So you may need to go in and touch a few areas up. These areas like the fingers here, they may be a bit too dark, but we can fix those later on as I'll show you in the next video. So what do we need to do next? Well, we have our base colour, we have our lighting pass. Now we could effectively leave this as it is. If I go back to here, now as you can see we've got this detail here, and that's because I've got ahead of myself, and the normal map we've added in some of the details which I haven't even talked about yet. So let's quickly turn off the lighting and look at the details that I've added in here. Now these are just separate layers, all just added on top of the base map using different blending modes to get the effects that you need. So if I turn that on like so, you can see these other layers which we've just added in on top, and I'll quickly go through them. Let's just zoom in slightly so you can see them a bit more. Now again, you can do a lot more to the texture than this, but I'm just showing you the basics, and then I'll encourage you to then go on and enhance this even more. So let's just turn all these off and we'll just discuss what we've got. So the trim basically just goes around the poncho. A dirt layer, now as you can see, this is just a texture that I've just brought in and overlaid. That just breaks up the surface nicely for us and just gets rid of that soft and clean look. A steel layer, now that's just again pasted over the elements which are metallic, like on the shoulder pad here. Again, a leather layer just overlaid. A pattern onto his belt here, and again that's just a cross, nothing complicated or fancy about that. Another texture overlaid onto his shirt, and then one on his bandana. Now these are quite faint, and that's because I'm going to use those, which I'll show you again in a second, and I'm going to have those stronger in the specular map, so they are actually, when the light passes over them, they'll show up more in the highlight. And again, another layer, just adding that sort of stitched cloth, cotton sort of effect to these areas here. Again, enhancing that childlike look of the character. Worn leather. Now this is just to give the edges of the leather a worn look, to make him look like they're less brand new and more like they've been used. And again, you can enhance this much further later on. And there's just another copy of the worn leather texture, which I've overlaid just to enhance that a little bit more. So there we have our detail maps. And that's just enhanced that texture very quickly, just taking textures, overlaying them. So if we add that to our lighting map, you can see there we've already started to build up quite a detailed texture without much hard work. Now it's not very difficult, just cutting out, overlaying, playing around with the different materials and textures, etc. And it's from here, now you've got these bases in place, that you can then go forward and go in with your Wacom tablet and start to paint in extra details if you want to. Like the belts here, they're quite plain, so you may want to go in, add a bit more detail onto those. Now I'll go back to the specular map which I mentioned earlier, and here I have another group just with the specular map sitting in it, just so we can look at it. And as you can see, the lighter areas are going to be shinier, the darker areas are going to be duller. So the pattern on his bandana and his poncho here, they're brighter because, as I said before, when the light casts over them, they will shine and be more obvious. If we compare that with the map before, you can hardly see them here. So again, when the light passes over them, they'll show up and it'll just make those areas a little bit more interesting. We have our skin tones, which have got that blue sort of specular colour that skin usually has. And it's basically just taking the elements from the detail map, putting them into another group, and then building up the texture that way. The same with the normal map. What we've done here is we've taken those details again, and we've created a height map from them. This can then be taken into a application like Crazy Bump, or even Smart Normal, which is an online version of the app, and used to combine with your base map to then add another detail layer. Excuse me. And that is what you saw on the lighting map when I brought in the green and the blue normal maps here. And that's where that detail had come from before. So if I save this as it is now with all these extra layers on top, we go back into Maya, let's reload that again. So here he is. As you can see, we've got that fabric detail there. There's a bit of stretching here, but we're not too worried about that. We could go in and we could tweak the actual texture on there. But at the end of the day, what we've got here is we've got all the bases and we've got a great starting point. If you like him as he is now, you could leave him and then pass him on as done. But as you can see, we've got a great starting point for his texture. Now in the image that comes with this, you'll notice he has a sword and he has his eyes and he has his a bandana. Now I've got those in this scene. I will just bring those back like so. So this is what you'll be looking at if we turn off the, if we turn on the lighting, should I say, use default lighting, and we'll turn on high quality rendering, just so we can see him with the normal maps applied as well. And there we go. So as you can see, it's looking quite nice. And all those subtle details have just helped to enhance the base texture and the normal map as well. And here we have his sword, which is, again, we've just created in much the same way as we did with him. Just starting off with primitives, building the main shape, then exporting a version of the sword with one subdivision, optimizing that down, and then projecting all your maps across after you've UV'd it. Exactly the same process we did for this little guy, but just done to his sword. And like I say, that's you can see that in the main render. So from here, you could essentially pass this off as done. You could say that guy's finished, let's get him rigged in the game, running around, and we'll see what he looks like. And we can then continue on and polish the textures and enhance him a bit more. And for this tutorial, we could leave this here and say we're finished, but there's just one more step that I want to go through, and that's to take this version into another application called 3D Coat. Some of you may have used it. And what we can do with that then is we can paint onto the actual model, and we can add to the normal map, we can add to the diffuse map, we can paint in more details. We can basically take this a lot further by interactively painting onto the model. Now we could have gone down the route of creating more height maps and then generating 2D normal maps from those. But I like to, when the model's nearly finished, export it and take it into this application, 3D Coat, and it's a lot more intuitive for adding final details and just touching up the model and fixing any slight errors. So this is 3D Coat, and what we need to do first is just import our model. Import for model for per pixel painting. Now you will have this with the project files. We need to set our texture resolution. Now I've been working to 3000 by 3000. Obviously you set it to whatever you've been working to, but I do find that if I'm working on a character and let's say his target resolution is 1024 by 1024, I always work higher than the resolution that I need. So in this case, double is good, but a little bit more is even better. It just gives you a bit more flexibility further down the line. If you have to do any renders, for example, you can use the higher resolution textures as opposed to the reduced ones that are in the game. So we click OK, we wait for that to load. There we go. So this is our model. Doesn't look anything special. So what we need to do next, we'll just close that down. What we need to do next is bring in the textures so we can see what we're working with. And you can bring in your normal map, your specular map, and your diffuse map. So first of all, we'll go to textures. We'll import our diffuse map. Just switch to our textures. So this is the diffuse map that we were left with. We'll import that one. There we go. And maybe that's assigned it to layer 1 here. So we'll maybe rename that to base diffuse. Next, normal map. And again, pick your body normal map. Now we're going to invert the green channel here, and that's because Maya uses normal maps slightly differently. If we didn't invert the green channel, then the normals would look wrong in here. So click OK, wait for that to load. There we go. There's our normal map. Now you can't actually edit this normal map, it's just there purely as reference. Finally, we'll import our specular map. Now here we've generated a colour specular map, and it will convert it into a black and white specular. But again, we're only using it for reference. We're not actually editing the specular map in here. There we go. So there's our model with all the textures applied. Hang on, I don't think it's actually imported that specular map. Import specular map. It should apply it to another layer. I'm not sure why it hasn't. Oh, unless we create a new layer and we import the specular map into that new layer. I think that may be it. It was trying to overlay the normal map. There we go, that's worked. As you can see, we've got that shine. And you can see that fabric just shining through with that detail. So from here, we can go in and we can edit the model. We can create a new layer. Let's just rename this one so we know what it is. So that's our base specular. So let's edit our normal map first. Just call that a name so we know what that layer is. And all we're going to do, and it's quite easy, we've got our brush set. We can set what type of brush we're going to use. And up here, this is quite important. We don't want to paint we don't want to paint this one because we are not using colour at the moment. We don't want to edit the specularity. We only want to edit the depth. And this is just effectively editing the normal map. Now you can see there are two dots there. That's because symmetry's on. So I'm just going to turn symmetry off. No symmetry. And what we're going to do is just go in and start to paint. As you can see there, we've easily, it's almost like sculpting. We've easily just added a very basic crease. But this is just painting directly onto the model and adding that detail into the normal map. So when it's exported, we'll have a nice normal map with all this extra detail added in. No need to mess about overlaying it onto the base normal map or anything like that. And what I'm doing is just painting in broad strokes. If you press Control, just like in your sculpting packages, it will do the opposite. So in this case, it'll create an indentation like so. As you can see. And there we have some basic creases. Now they're a bit chunky, so we hold down Shift and that changes it to green, like you can see. And that is effectively smoothing that down. So we can soften that at the edges just to make the crease softer. As you can see, and that's just given us those subtle soft creases. Now obviously you should have some proper reference to work from while you're doing these this editing cloth. But you can then go in like that and just work on all the cloth sections, just painting in more detail. Obviously you can add more into the belt. We could even go in and say the shoulder pad, let's just add in some slices, some more damage where he's been fighting, maybe soften that off a little bit. And again, we're using quite a sharp brush here, so you've got broader brushes to use. But we're only editing the normal map at this stage. We're not editing the diffuse or anything else. Now once you're happy with what you've painted with the normal map, and remember you can turn on symmetry across X, and what it will do by default is show this symmetry plane here, which just shows you what axis it's using. So if you wanted to paint on this side, you turn on symmetry and it would automatically do it to the other side. So we need more detail in all the cloth, in his trousers, and even up here we could go in on his bandana, turn on symmetry, and just add in a few more crease details around here. Like so. And again, this is just very quick. I do encourage you to download this app, and if you haven't already got it, that is, and play around with it. It's great for taking low polygon geometry that you've got a very basic normal map on and just painting in extra detail. You can use masks. It's effectively like ZBrush or Mudbox. You can actually do sculpting in it as well. As you can see up here, we have a sculpt option. You can also sculpt using voxels, and there are some quite good retopology tools in here as well. So I do recommend you get this and experiment with it. It's a great all-round package. So let's say we've edited our normal map, we've painted in all our details. Now what we want to do, if I go to view and we're just going to go to flat shade, just as a tip, you can also go to relief only, and that will just show you the normal map, which makes it a little bit easier to paint with. What we're going to do is go to flat shade, and that's just going to show us our diffuse. And straight away we can see we have some issues here where we've got a slight seam on the fingers. We select our base diffuse layer, and I'm just going to select a broader brush. Now we can edit the diffuse in this, not like the normal map which was there was purely as reference. So what we can do is just go in, use our soft brush, our smooth brush, and just smooth that. Let's just turn off these. Oh, actually, just wait for those to turn off. It helps if you turn off the depth and turn on the colour channel. Now if we smooth it, as you can see, we're nicely getting rid of that seam. It's not perfect, but you can always go in, select a colour, and now paint over the top of this. But just for quickly tidying up these areas, we could just go in with a smooth brush and just soften them. It just makes them less obvious, particularly on the thumb there. Just go in, just soften those, and it just gets rid of those seams. Soften the fingertips detail there, and again just generally going around and tidying up any issues. And of course, like I said earlier, you can go in and you can paint more detail in here, maybe add a bit more to the wear and tear on his armour, go around, even change the colour or paint in more details or logos. You even have the option to overlay text over here, which it does a very nice job of. But again, if you've got this application, then you probably already know all about all this stuff, but if you haven't, I encourage you to download it and give it a go and play around with all these sorts of tools. The bits that I'm showing you here are just touching the iceberg, really. Just the tip of the iceberg. So we've edited our normal map. We'll just turn these back on. Just give it a second to load in. View, go back to smooth shade. Turn off symmetry to get rid of that plane. So let's say we've edited our normal map. And what I'll do is I will just quickly load in a file which I've already edited. So there we go, we have all our different layers, as you can see. We've added a lot more detail, a lot more creases into his arm, and even into his trousers and his shirt, just to give that extra bit of detail. So then all you need to do is go to Texture, Export Diffuse Map. We'll go to our 3D Coat directory, overwrite this, and it'll ask you if you want it to fill in the empty parts of the texture. And what this will do is it will fill out the areas around each UV shell, which will mean that when it comes to reducing this texture, it reduces texture bleed, so you won't enhance those seams. So click yes, let that export, and we do the same for the normal map using tangent space because we're working on a low polygon mesh, and you can even go in and do the specular map if you've actually gone in and edited it. So if we switch back to Maya now, I'll just grab my mouse. So here we have our character, our ninja character. He's got the extra detailing, which we've just painted in 3D coat. As you can see, it's just helped to enhance him slightly, just make him a bit more interesting. We've got his eyes, which again are just a basic texture with on a polygon which floats over the top of his face, and this makes it easy so in game you can just swap the texture to give him different expressions. His hair does have an alpha channel at the end, at the tips, but Maya, even in 2013 with their fancy Viewport 2.0 updates, it doesn't seem to handle transparencies as nicely as it should, although that may just be down to my video card. But this is the finished character. We could go in and do a lot more detail, do more painting, but I'm going to leave this tutorial here. We've covered all the bases. We've covered high resolution modelling, low resolution modelling, model optimization, testing the model to make sure it's working best with normal maps, UVing, texturing, and lots of other bits and bobs in between. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please drop by my website and let me know if you have. It's antonline.co.uk, and I will see you in the next tutorial.